Tonight, we will tell you a story about a time when life was a constant struggle against overwhelming odds, and survival often depended on desperate, sometimes bizarre solutions. This is a story about the medieval world and the life hacks people actually used just to make it through another day. You will learn why people rarely bathed, how they tried to cure illnesses with leeches, what they did to make spoiled food edible, and why seeking beauty could be a deadly pursuit. We will explore how justice was delivered by fire and water, and why traveling even short distances was a perilous gamble. Oh, and if you enjoy these stories that transform history into a journey for your mind as you drift to sleep, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and perhaps sharing your ideas for future topics in the comments below. New stories for sleep arrive here every day. All right, find a comfortable spot now, let your body relax, take a deep, slow breath, and let it out fully. Feel yourself sinking into the softness beneath you, letting go of any tension. The story of these ingenious, yet often terrifying methods begins not with grand battles or royal decrees, but with the fundamental struggle against the sheer harshness of everyday medieval life. Imagine a world where each new day was not just a challenge, but a true battle for survival. A world devoid of antibiotics, clean running water, or even a basic understanding of how diseases spread. This was the reality of the Middle Ages for the majority of people. It was a time when a person's life, even if they were of noble birth, rarely lasted longer than 40 or 50 years, and for a simple peasant or townsman, death could come much sooner. You would have lived constantly alongside invisible threats that could strike without warning, turning an ordinary day into your last. From the moment of your birth, you would have faced incredible hardships. Infant mortality was horrifyingly high. Many children did not survive to see their first birthday, becoming just a brief shadow in their parents' memory. If a child survived infancy, they faced a childhood filled with hard labor, dangers, and deprivation. Illnesses that seem like minor ailments to us today could be a death sentence then. A common cold could turn into pneumonia, a small cut into a festering infection, and a toothache into agonizing decay, leading to death. You would have watched people around you, young and old, suddenly fade away from unknown maladies that could spread like wildfire, leaving only devastation in their wake. In this world, what we call science in the modern sense did not exist. People did not know about microbes, viruses, or anatomy as we do. Medicine was based on ancient texts, superstitions, and age-old traditions that were often not just useless, but deadly. If you fell ill, you wouldn't go to a doctor in the modern sense, but rather to a barber who could let your blood, or to a healer who might offer a talisman or a herbal concoction. You would have seen people trying to heal themselves by resorting to the strangest and most illogical methods, believing that illness was caused by evil spirits, bad air, or an imbalance of invisible forces within the body. Food was another constant worry. The harvest depended on the mercy of nature, and any drought or flood could lead to famine. You would have known true hunger when your stomach cramped and your strength left you. Preserving food was a huge problem. Without refrigerators or modern preservatives, meat, fish, and vegetables spoiled very quickly. You would have had to eat what was available, and often that was what we would consider unfit for consumption today. people were forced to find ways to extend the shelf life of their food and mask the unpleasant taste and smell of spoiling provisions, which led to very peculiar culinary habits. Your home, if you had one, would have been far from the modern idea of comfort. Most dwellings were simple, often single-room structures with earthen floors and thatched roofs. It was cold inside in the winter and stuffy in the summer. Smoke from the hearth, which was used for cooking and heating, would fill the air, stinging your eyes and settling on everything around you. You would have slept on straw mattresses teeming with insects, and your body would have constantly itched from fleas and lice. Rats and mice would have been your constant companions, infiltrating barns, spreading disease, and gnawing at scarce food supplies. The society you lived in would have been permeated by a strict hierarchy. You would have known your place, whether as a peasant, a knight, or a craftsman, and changing it was almost impossible. The laws were harsh, and justice often depended on one's social standing. If you were accused of a crime, you might be offered a trial by God, where your innocence or guilt was determined by whether you could survive boiling water, hot iron, or the ordeal of cold water. You would have seen people rely on such methods, believing that higher powers themselves would reveal the truth, though to us it looks like barbarism. Even personal hygiene and beauty were completely different. The concept of regular bathing was foreign to most. People believed that water could be dangerous, opening the pores to disease. Instead, they used strong-smelling perfumes and herbs to mask bodily odors. The pursuit of beauty, especially among the nobility, could lead to the use of dangerous substances. For instance, to achieve pale skin, women might apply white lid to their faces, not knowing that the lead was slowly poisoning them. To widen their pupils and give their eyes a sparkle, they used drops from belladonna, a poisonous plant that worsened vision and caused hallucinations. Travel was a rare and dangerous undertaking. Roads were poorly developed, full of robbers and wild animals. Without maps in the modern sense, and without signposts, you would have relied on fellow travelers, rare road signs, or simply the knowledge of locals. Every journey was a risk, where you could lose not only your property, but also your life. All of this, the constant struggle with disease, hunger, unsanitary conditions, unpredictable nature, and harsh laws, forced people to find any way to survive. These life hacks of the Middle Ages were not the result of laziness or whim. They were desperate attempts to alleviate an unbearable reality, using the knowledge that was available. These methods, however strange or even horrifying they may seem to us today, were the only things people knew, and the only things they believed could save them from imminent doom. They were born not from a desire to simplify life, but from the necessity to survive at any cost. And it is these amazing, sometimes grim, but always human methods of adaptation that we will now explore. Imagine a world where the air you breathed was thought to be your enemy, a silent carrier of sickness and death. This was a pervasive belief during the Middle Ages, long before the microscope revealed the existence of tiny, unseen microbes. People then operated under the miasma theory, a concept that profoundly shaped their understanding of disease and, consequently, their daily habits. They believed that illnesses like the plague, cholera, or even common fevers were not caused by contagion from person to person, but by miasma, noxious, foul-smelling vapors emanating from decaying organic matter, swamps, unburied bodies, or even stagnant water. If a place reeked of putrefaction or waste, it was considered a breeding ground for sickness, and that odor was thought to carry disease into the body. This fundamental belief directly influenced personal hygiene, leading to practices that might seem baffling to us today. For you, a warm bath is a refreshing ritual, a symbol of cleanliness and comfort. For a person living in medieval times, such a simple act could be perceived as a dangerous vulnerability. The logic, from their perspective, was chillingly simple. If warm water opened the pores of the skin, then those opened pores would provide easy entry points for the malevolent miasma to seep into the body, causing illness. Therefore, frequent bathing, as we understand it with soap and abundant water, was exceptionally rare. Many individuals, even among the nobility, might bathe only a few times a year, perhaps on special occasions or when explicitly prescribed by a physician for a specific ailment. For the vast majority of the population, a thorough cleansing of the entire body was an infrequent luxury, if it happened at all. Instead, people might simply wipe themselves down with damp cloths, focusing on visible dirt rather than deep cleanliness. The consequence, naturally, was a pervasive body odor that was simply an accepted part of daily existence, a constant companion in homes, markets, and crowded streets. This was not a matter of choice or preference in the modern sense. It was a deeply ingrained cultural practice rooted in their understanding of health and disease. To combat this perceived threat from the very air and to mask the inevitable bodily odors that arose from infrequent washing, people turned to strong aromatics. This wasn't merely about smelling pleasant. It was a perceived act of self-preservation, a vital part of their daily life hacks against an invisible enemy. Wealthy individuals would often carry what were known as pomanders. These were small decorative containers, often made of precious metals and intricately perforated, designed to hold potent aromatic substances such as ambergris, musk, civet, or a blend of dried herbs and spices like cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg. Worn on a chain around the neck or wrist, or simply held to the nose when passing through particularly foul-smelling areas, these pomanders were believed to create a personal protective bubble of purified air around the wearer, effectively warding off the miasma. The heavier and more intense the scent, the stronger its perceived protective qualities. For those of more modest means, a similar principle applied, though with simpler tools. They might carry small bunches of fragrant flowers or herbs, often referred to as posies, or simply rub their clothes and bodies with locally available aromatics like lavender, rosemary, or thyme. The strong, pungent scents were thought to literally push away the bad air, making it impossible for the disease-carrying miasma to penetrate the body. This belief extended even into the practices of medieval physicians. When tending to the sick, especially during outbreaks of devastating diseases like the Black Death, doctors would often employ extreme measures based on the miasma theory. You might have seen images of the infamous plague doctor mask with its distinctive beak-like protrusion. This wasn't just a macabre fashion statement, it was a functional piece of protective equipment, filled with strong-smelling herbs, spices, and sometimes even vinegar-soaked sponges. The doctor believed that by breathing through this aromatic filter, they were purifying the air before it entered their lungs, thereby protecting themselves from the miasma emanating from their dying patients. It was a crude yet desperate attempt to apply their limited scientific understanding to a terrifying reality. Even in ordinary homes, during times of illness, people would burn aromatic woods, herbs, or frankincense, believing the smoke would cleanse the air and drive away the disease. The constant presence of these heavy, often cloying scents would have been a defining characteristic of the medieval atmosphere, a testament to their constant struggle against unseen threats. Their daily lives were a careful dance around perceived atmospheric dangers, where every sweet fragrance was a tiny, hopeful shield against the overwhelming forces of disease and decay. It was a world where scent was considered a powerful, almost magical form of defense, and cleanliness, as we define it today, was a potential liability. Their approach to hygiene was less about removing dirt and more about creating a barrier against what they believed was the very source of illness, a testament to how profoundly misunderstanding could shape survival strategies. Beyond the superficial remedies for bad odors, the core of medieval understanding of health was rooted in a theory that sounds alien to us today, yet profoundly shaped every medical practice for centuries. Imagine, if you will, that your very essence, your health, was believed to be a delicate balance of four fundamental fluids within your body. These were known as the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each was associated with specific organs, temperaments, and even the natural elements and seasons, reflecting the holistic medieval worldview. Blood, warm and moist, was linked to the heart and a cheerful, optimistic disposition, much like the vibrant energy of spring. Phlegm, cold and moist, was tied to the brain, influencing a calm, stoic, or even apathetic nature, mirroring the chill and dampness of winter. Yellow bile, hot and dry, was connected to the liver, governing an irritable or choleric temperament, akin to the intense, fiery heat of summer. Black bile, cold and dry, was associated with the spleen, believed to cause melancholy, reflecting the somber, decaying essence of autumn. The prevailing belief was that good health was a state of perfect equilibrium among these four humors. Illness, therefore, was not caused by external pathogens, but by an imbalance, an excess or deficiency of one or more of these internal fluids. If you felt feverish, it might be due to an overwhelming excess of hot blood. If you were prone to anger, perhaps too much yellow bile coursed through you. Diagnosing such an imbalance was less about examining specific symptoms as we understand them, and more about observing your general disposition, the color of your urine, the texture of your stool, or even subtle changes in your pulse. A physician, or more commonly, a barber surgeon, a practical general practitioner who also performed minor surgeries, would carefully assess these signs. Once an imbalance was identified, the primary goal of treatment was to restore harmony. For many ailments, particularly those believed to be caused by an overwhelming excess of blood, the most common and widely applied remedy was bloodletting. This ancient practice truly reached its zenith in the Middle Ages. You might find yourself seated as a skilled practitioner prepared to open a vein. Sometimes, leeches would be carefully applied to your skin. their bodies swelling as they engorged themselves on your blood. Other times, a sharp lancet or a specialized tool called a phleem would be used to make a precise incision in a prominent vein, frequently in the arm, wrist, or neck, allowing the bad blood to flow freely into a collecting bowl. The amount of blood removed could vary wildly, from a small cupful for a minor headache to a considerable quantity, perhaps even a pint or more, for a severe fever or inflammation, depending on the perceived gravity of your condition. This was not a last resort. Bloodletting was a routine, almost ritualistic procedure, prescribed for everything from a common cold and persistent headaches to more serious conditions like fevers, inflammations, and even mental disturbances. The rationale was simple. Remove the excess, and the body would naturally rebalance itself, restoring health. While occasionally it might have offered temporary symptomatic relief, more often than not, it led to severe weakness, debilitating anemia, and significantly increased susceptibility to infection, especially given the rudimentary understanding of hygiene and sterilization practices of the era. For ailments of the mind or excruciatingly persistent headaches, a more drastic and terrifying procedure might be suggested: trypanning, or the surgical drilling of a hole directly into your skull. This was certainly not undertaken lightly, but was surprisingly common, with archaeological evidence showing skulls with trepanned holes that had clearly healed, indicating patient survival. The underlying belief was that a hole could release evil spirits trapped within the head, alleviate internal pressure, causing chronic headaches or epileptic seizures, or even literally cure madness by allowing malevolent humors or spirits to escape. Imagine the scene. You are held down, perhaps given a rudimentary anesthetic like opium, mandrake, or a strong alcoholic drink to dull the pain, as the barber surgeon, with grim determination, begins to scrape or drill into your skull. You might hear the chilling grating sound against the bone, feel the unsettling vibrations, and the cold, unyielding pressure of the metal tool as it slowly penetrates. The risks were immense and immediate. Infection of the brain, fatal hemorrhage, or irreparable neurological damage were constant, ever-present threats. Yet, for those suffering from debilitating conditions with no other known cure, it represented a desperate hope. Beyond the immediate struggles with their own bodies and the precarious balance of humors, the medieval person faced an equally relentless and universal battle against the decay of their most fundamental necessity: food itself. In a world utterly devoid of the refrigeration we now consider indispensable, keeping provisions fresh was a constant uphill fight, a daily test of human ingenuity against the relentless march of time and the invisible, ever-present armies of microorganisms. Imagine, if you will, a bustling medieval kitchen, not filled with the hum of modern appliances, but with the subtle, unavoidable scent of impending spoilage. Every ingredient, from the freshly slaughtered meat to the carefully harvested vegetables, was a ticking clock, its edibility measured in hours or at best a few days. The fight against decay was an omnipresent concern, shaping dietary habits and culinary practices in profound ways, a constant negotiation with the perishable nature of life itself. The methods of food preservation available during the Middle Ages were, by our standards, remarkably crude, yet they were absolutely essential for survival. particularly through the long, lean winter months when fresh supplies were scarce. Salting was perhaps the most widespread and effective technique. Imagine barrels upon barrels of fish, caught in the rivers or from the sea, packed heavily in salt, drawing out every last drop of moisture, inhibiting the growth of bacteria that cause putrefaction. Meat, too, was often salted, sometimes in thick layers, then perhaps pressed to further remove water, creating hard, durable provisions. Smoking was another vital method, especially for various cuts of meat and certain types of fish. The slow, permeating smoke not only imparted a distinctive flavor, but also acted as a powerful preservative, coating the food and preventing microbial activity. Drying was widely used for fruits, such as apples and plums, for various herbs gathered from fields and gardens, and even for some root vegetables. These shriveled, concentrated forms of produce could be stored for months, providing essential nutrients when fresh produce was unavailable. Pickling, utilizing strong vinegars or brines, offered another means to extend the life of vegetables like cabbage, transforming it into sauerkraut, or preserving small fish and eggs. Despite these diligent efforts, spoilage remained an unavoidable, often daily reality. You would, almost certainly, find yourself facing food that was, by modern hygienic standards, clearly past its prime, perhaps even alarming to your senses. A piece of meat might possess a faint, unsettling odor, a subtle yet unmistakable hint of something not quite right, perhaps even a metallic or sour note. It might display a slightly greenish tint or a slimy texture on its surface, a visual warning of its age. Bread, a staple of every meal, could quickly become stale and hard, developing patches of fuzzy mold if left for too long in a damp environment. Vegetables, no matter how carefully stored in cool cellars or root pits, would inevitably wilt, soften, or begin to rot at their edges, their crispness lost. Yet, throwing food away, discarding valuable calories and nutrients, was a luxury that few, if any, medieval households, from peasant cottages to noble manors, could afford. Every scrap was precious, a testament to the labor and resources expended in its acquisition, a bulwark against the ever-present threat of hunger. So, people coped with this pervasive reality with a pragmatism born of necessity. You might carefully, perhaps even ritualistically, cut off the visibly spoiled parts, hoping that the remaining portion was still safe to consume and would not bring illness. Sometimes the food was simply cooked longer or more intensely than we might today. Perhaps simmered in a stew for hours until its original form was barely discernible, or roasted over an open fire until thoroughly charred on the outside. This prolonged cooking was not merely for tenderness. It served a practical purpose, aiming to kill off any unwelcome microorganisms or simply to make the compromised food more palatable, more digestible, masking its true condition. The taste, however, was often significantly compromised, carrying lingering notes of its age, a subtle bitterness, or an unpleasant sourness. This is precisely where spices, those exotic, incredibly valuable and often hotly contested commodities, played a role far beyond mere flavor enhancement or a display of wealth. Spices like black pepper, cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon, transported over vast distances from the distant, mysterious lands of the East, were more than just symbols of status and affluence. They were, in a very practical sense, essential tools for daily survival. Their strong, pungent aromas and Intense, often fiery flavors were remarkably effective at masking the unpleasant taste, and crucially, the telltale smell of food that was beginning to spoil or had already gone slightly off. Imagine a piece of meat that had developed a slightly sour or gamey edge. With a generous application of freshly ground black pepper and a few crushed cloves, its undesirable characteristics could be significantly subdued, rendering it almost palatable, even desirable. A hearty stew, crafted from ingredients that were no longer at their freshest, could be transformed into something seemingly delicious, even aromatic, with a dash of nutmeg or a sprinkle of cinnamon, allowing its consumption without complaint. It wasn't primarily about enhancing good food, it was about making compromised food tolerable, even enjoyable, preventing waste, and ensuring that calories were consumed and hunger appeased. This constant, ingenious battle against spoilage meant that the typical medieval diet, while often hearty in terms of portion size, frequently lacked the consistent freshness and nutritional integrity that we take for granted in our modern world of ubiquitous refrigeration and complex supply chains. It also contributed to a certain robustness of stomach and a less sensitive palate, accustomed to digesting what modern sensibilities might instantly reject as inedible. The culinary landscape of the Middle Ages was, therefore, a profound testament to human resilience and adaptability, a daily, intimate negotiation with nature's relentless cycle of growth and decay, where every meal was a small, hard-won victory against the inevitable. It was a world where the line between sustenance and potential illness was often blurred, where the art of cooking was as much about preservation and masking as it was about flavor, and where necessity truly was the mother of invention, no matter how unsavory the immediate outcome might seem to us now. This relentless vigilance over one's plate, this constant struggle to keep hunger at bay with whatever means available, was just one more intricate layer in the complex tapestry of daily medieval survival, a tapestry woven with threads of hardship, profound determination, and ingenious, if sometimes desperate, solutions to the most basic of human needs. The struggle for food was intrinsically linked to the struggle for health, and both were battles fought with limited tools and an extraordinary enduring spirit, a stark reminder of how challenging simply living could be. Beyond the constant battle against food spoilage, there was an even more intimate and pervasive struggle that permeated every aspect of medieval life. The relentless presence of unwanted companions. These were not friends or neighbors, but the myriad of vermin and insects that shared every home, every bed, and often every person. Imagine, if you will, the incessant itching and the subtle yet persistent sensation of crawling that would have been a daily reality from the moment you awoke until you tried to find sleep in the dark. Fleas and lice were not just an occasional nuisance, they were an undeniable constant, an uninvited guest clinging to hair, skin, and clothing. They thrived in conditions where frequent bathing was a luxury, if not entirely unheard of for many, where clothing was rarely washed thoroughly, and where straw-filled mattresses and bedding provided ideal breeding grounds, warm and undisturbed. The very fabric of life, often woven from coarse wool or rough linen, offered countless tiny hiding places for these invaders, making them an almost inescapable part of human existence. People in the Middle Ages had a pragmatic, if often profoundly ineffective approach to dealing with these minuscule adversaries. One of the most common and direct methods was simple manual removal. You would have seen, or perhaps even participated in, the daily ritual of picking lice from hair and clothing, a task often performed by family members for one another, a shared burden of existence. Fine-toothed combs, meticulously crafted from bone, wood, or even ivory for the wealthier, were essential tools in this ongoing battle, dragged through hair to dislodge the tiny creatures and their nits. The sound of a comb scraping through hair, followed by the faint crackle of a crushed louse, would have been a familiar domestic sound, an inescapable auditory reminder of their presence. To ward off the equally persistent fleas, some would scatter strong-smelling herbs like lavender, mint, rosemary, or wormwood in their bedding, beneath their clothes, or even sewn into small sachets worn on the person. The belief was that the pungent aroma would repel the pests, making the human body and its warmth less appealing. Sometimes these herbs were even burned in homes, creating a smoky, fragrant haze that was thought to purify the air and discourage insects, although its true effectiveness against a deeply entrenched infestation was likely negligible. Yet, people persisted with these small, often futile efforts, desperate for any measure of relief from the incessant irritation. There were also more elaborate, though still rudimentary, inventions that served as a kind of medieval pest trap. These were small, often hollowed-out pieces of wood, sometimes made from the horn of an animal, or tiny boxes lined with a sticky substance like resin or a piece of fur, occasionally baited with blood or honey. These ingenious, yet ultimately limited devices would be placed strategically near beds or in warm corners, hoping to lure the fleas away from the human occupants, trapping them before they could inflict more bites. Though these methods offered some minor temporary relief, they rarely provided a complete solution. The battle was ongoing, a daily skirmish against an enemy that simply refused to retreat, adapting to every meager defense. The constant discomfort, the itching, and the visible presence of these parasites were simply accepted as an unavoidable part of life, a minor torment in a world full of greater hardships, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. But the problem extended far beyond mere insects. Rats and mice were another pervasive and far more destructive threat, their presence a constant, unsettling undercurrent in every medieval settlement. These rodents were omnipresent, scuttling through the straw and rushes on floors, gnawing relentlessly at stored grains in larders and barns, and contaminating any food source they could possibly reach. Their nocturnal scurrying and incessant gnawing noises, echoing from behind walls and beneath floorboards, would have been a familiar yet deeply unwelcome soundtrack to the medieval night. Their presence was not just a matter of nuisance or minor damage. It carried the terrifying and often fatal risk of disease, though the scientific connection between rats, the fleas they carried, and the transmission of devastating plagues like the Black Death would not be understood for centuries. For the medieval person, rats were a tangible symbol of dirt, decay, and chaos, a constant living reminder of the fragile line between order and the wildness that perpetually threatened to reclaim human spaces. To combat these larger, more formidable pests, people relied primarily on natural predators. Cats, often feral or semi-feral, were not merely pets. They were highly valued, essential workers kept specifically for their rodent-catching abilities, their silent hunts a vital part of household defense. In some wealthier households, even small, agile dogs were kept for similar purposes, their barks and movements serving to deter rodents. Primitive traps, ranging from simple falling stone devices designed to crush the unfortunate creature to more elaborate cage traps that would capture them alive, were also employed. However, their impact on the vast, rapidly reproducing rodent population was often negligible in the grand scheme of things. Basic attempts to block holes in walls, floors, and food storage containers with clay or stones were a perpetual but often futile task, as the determined rodents could always find a new entry point, a new weakness in the defenses. Superstition also played a significant role in these desperate attempts at control. Some would resort to charms or even formal excommunications of the pests by the church, believing that divine power could succeed where earthly methods failed. This constant struggle against vermin, along with the dirt and discomfort it entailed, was simply accepted as an inescapable part of existence. Yet, amidst the grime, discomfort, and constant struggle for survival, a curious paradox shaped medieval life: the persistent human desire for beauty. Even then, people yearned to adorn themselves, to enhance their appearance, often unaware of or resigned to the grave dangers inherent in their methods. The pursuit of what was considered beautiful often led individuals down paths fraught with toxic peril, transforming everyday cosmetics into insidious poisons. The ideal of beauty in the medieval period was distinct from our own. A pale, almost translucent complexion was highly prized, associated with nobility and an indoor life. To achieve this coveted pallor, many resorted to using white lead, known as ceruse. This lead derivative was meticulously ground into a fine powder, then mixed with vinegar, water, or oils to create a creamy paste. Women, and sometimes men, would apply this concoction generously to their faces, hoping to create a mask of pristine whiteness. The immediate effect was striking. Skin appeared unnaturally smooth and porcelain-like, a stark contrast to ruddy, weathered complexions. However, the long-term consequences were devastating. Lead is profoundly toxic. With each application, tiny particles were absorbed through the skin, slowly poisoning the user. Initially, the skin itself suffered, becoming dry, flaky, prone to severe irritation and disfigurement, often developing a ghastly gray tinge beneath the white mask. Beyond superficial damage, lead poisoning or plumbism attacked internal organs. Users experienced chronic headaches, debilitating fatigue, and severe abdominal pain, often mistaken for other ailments. As the poison accumulated, it led to kidney failure, anemia, and neurological damage, manifesting as tremors, memory loss, and even madness. The slow, agonizing decline was often attributed to natural causes or divine punishment, rather than the very beauty products intended to enhance life. Many who sought beauty found only a slow, painful death, their quest for an ephemeral ideal culminating in permanent disfigurement far worse than any natural imperfection. Another perilous ingredient in the medieval beauty arsenal was belladonna, also called deadly nightshade. This plant, with its dark berries, held a potent secret: atropine, a powerful alkaloid. In the medieval mind, large, sparkling eyes were captivating. To achieve this, women placed drops of liquid extracted from the belladonna plant directly into their eyes. The atropine acted as a mydriatic, causing pupils to dilate dramatically, making eyes appear larger, darker, and more luminous. The immediate visual impact was undeniable. Eyes seemed to sparkle, catching light enchantingly. The name Belladonna itself, meaning beautiful lady in Italian, reflects this desired effect. However, the cost was immense. The very dilation impaired vision, making users highly sensitive to light and causing blurred sight. Chronic use led to persistent eye irritation, inflammation, and in severe cases, irreversible blindness. Beyond ocular damage, belladonna is a potent neurotoxin. Its systemic absorption could lead to terrifying symptoms: a racing heart, dry mouth, difficulty swallowing, hallucinations, delirium, and convulsions. In higher doses, belladonna could easily induce respiratory failure and death. The user, in pursuit of an enhanced gaze, risked not only sight, but life, all for an aesthetic ideal prioritizing a momentary illusion over long-term well-being. The pervasive lack of scientific understanding regarding toxicology meant these dangerous practices continued unchecked for centuries. People operated under a different paradigm, where cause and effect were often linked to supernatural forces or vague concepts of bad humors. The slow onset of symptoms from lead or belladonna poisoning made it difficult to connect the gradual health decline to daily cosmetic application. A woman might simply grow weaker, her skin more sallow, her mind less sharp, and her family would mourn her premature aging or succumb to an unknown illness, never suspecting that the very substances she used for beauty were steadily eroding her life. This tragic irony underscores the desperate nature of medieval existence, where even self-adornment became a gamble with mortality. The quest for beauty, like the struggle against disease or vermin, was another arena where medieval people devised life hacks that, from our modern perspective, appear terrifyingly misguided. They were simply doing what they believed was necessary or what tradition dictated to navigate a world offering few easy answers and many hidden perils. The drive to conform to societal ideals, even at profound personal cost, illuminates the complex and often brutal calculus of daily life in an age defined by limited knowledge and overwhelming challenges. The medieval pursuit of beauty, as we have seen, often brought with it unforeseen and dangerous consequences. Yet, the challenges of daily life extended far beyond personal adornment. They permeated the very structures in which people lived. Imagine for a moment, if you will, the reality of a medieval home, a place that offered shelter but rarely true comfort. These were not the insulated, temperature-controlled spaces we know today. For most people, homes were simple, often crude constructions, built from readily available materials like wood, wattle, and daub, a mixture of clay, straw, and animal dung applied to a woven lattice of wooden strips, or rough-hewn stone. These structures, while providing a roof over one's head, were inherently drafty. Gaps between timbers, ill-fitting doors, and the absence of glass in windows, which were often just small openings covered with wooden shutters, oiled paper, or thin animal hides to keep out the worst of the elements, meant that the biting cold of winter or the damp chill of rain could easily penetrate the living space. Warmth was a constant struggle, a daily, even hourly concern. The primary source of heat was almost universally an open hearth, a fire burning directly on the floor, often in the center of the main room. This arrangement, while providing some warmth, came with a significant drawback: smoke. Without a proper chimney, particularly in earlier medieval homes, the smoke from the fire had no clear escape route. It would often rise to the ceiling, linger, and eventually find its way out through small vents, a hole in the roof, or simply seep through the thatch or cracks in the walls. You can almost picture the scene: a perpetual haze hanging in the air, stinging the eyes, and coating every surface with a layer of fine black soot. The acrid smell of wood smoke would have been ever present, clinging to clothes, hair, and furniture, a constant reminder of the internal struggle against the elements. This relentless exposure to smoke led to chronic respiratory problems, persistent coughing, eye irritation, and a generally unhealthy indoor environment. It was a harsh trade-off: warmth at the cost of clear air and long-term health, a compromise made out of sheer necessity. To combat the pervasive cold, people employed various strategies, often born of necessity rather than comfort. Sleeping arrangements were rarely private. Families, and sometimes even servants or other household members, would often share beds or sleep together in close proximity to cool their body heat. Animals, especially in peasant homes, were frequently brought indoors during the colder months. A cow, a pig, or a few chickens in a corner of the dwelling provided not only a living source of warmth, but also an added layer of insulation against the outside chill. While practical for survival and an ingenious use of available resources, this practice certainly did not contribute to cleanliness or pleasant odors within the home. The strong, earthy smells of livestock would mingle with the ever-present smoke and the general lack of personal hygiene, creating a distinct and often overwhelming atmosphere that permeated every aspect of indoor life. Beyond the basic fire and animal warmth, people relied heavily on layers of heavy woolen clothing, thick blankets, and furs to keep warm, even indoors. Furniture was sparse and often multifunctional, with simple wooden chests serving as both storage and seating, and rough tables used for meals and work. There was little concept of individual space or privacy as we understand it today. Life was communal, driven by the immediate need for collective survival against the relentless elements. The constant battle against cold and damp meant that simple illnesses could quickly escalate into life-threatening conditions. A persistent cough, exacerbated by smoky air, could easily turn into pneumonia. A chill from inadequate shelter could lead to fever and debilitating weakness, leaving one vulnerable to other ailments and reducing their capacity for crucial daily labor. The construction methods themselves, while effective for their time and given the limited technology, offered only partial protection. Thatch roofs, made from layers of dried straw or reeds, were excellent insulators against heat and cold when well maintained, but they were also notoriously prone to dampness, insect infestation, and were a significant fire hazard, especially with open hearths below. Wattle and daub walls, though relatively easy to build and repair, were not robust against the elements and required constant attention to prevent drafts and structural decay. Stone homes, while more durable and offering better protection against intruders, were notoriously cold and damp, their thick walls retaining the chill long after the fire had died down, creating a perpetually clammy interior. These frequently inadequate attempts at creating warmth and shelter were not due to a lack of ingenuity on the part of medieval people, but rather a profound lack of advanced resources, scientific knowledge, and the sophisticated technology we take for granted. The very idea of sealed windows, efficient central heating systems, or even truly effective ventilation systems simply did not exist, or were beyond the means of all but the wealthiest few. People lived intimately with the natural world, enduring its harshness within their own walls. Their homes were not havens of comfort, but rather functional spaces, constantly battling the relentless elements. The daily routine was shaped by the immediate need to maintain the fire, to mend the drafts, and simply to endure the pervasive chill and smoke. It was a life lived in constant negotiation with discomfort, where the very act of seeking warmth brought with it its own inherent set of challenges and health risks, fundamentally shaping the daily existence of medieval individuals. This was the ever-present backdrop against which all other aspects of medieval life unfolded, a testament to the resilience and often the sheer endurance of those who lived through it. The harsh realities of medieval life extended far beyond the confines of a smoky home or the constant battle against cold. They permeated every aspect of existence, including the very concept of justice. In an age before established police forces, forensic science, or standardized laws as we understand them, proving guilt or innocence was a precarious and often terrifying endeavor. People lived in a world where divine intervention was not just a belief, but a fundamental expectation. When human testimony was contradictory, when evidence was scarce, or when a crime was so heinous that only God could truly know the truth, the medieval mind turned to a practice known as the trial by ordeal. This was not a trial of logic or reason, but a physical test designed to compel God himself to reveal the truth, to show a clear sign. It was a desperate measure born of profound faith and deep ignorance. One of the most common and feared of these tests was the ordeal by hot iron. Imagine the scene: a hushed crowd, a priest intoning prayers, and in the center, a fire, its flames licking at a bar of iron. This iron, typically weighing between 1 and 3 pounds, would be heated until it glowed a furious red. The accused, their face pale with fear, would then be forced to grasp this scorching metal with their bare hand and carry it for a prescribed distance, usually 9 paces. The hand would be immediately bandaged and sealed by the priest, preventing tampering. For 3 long days, the accused endured the agony. On the 3rd day, the bandages were removed before the assembled community. If the wound was clean, if it showed signs of healing without infection, it was declared a divine miracle, a clear sign from God that the accused was innocent. But if the wound was festering, blackened, or putrid, guilt was confirmed, and the consequences were often dire, ranging from heavy fines to exile or execution. Another equally terrifying method was the ordeal by hot water. For this test, a large cauldron of water would be brought to a violent boil, steam rising in scalding clouds. The accused would plunge their arm, sometimes up to the elbow, into this bubbling liquid to retrieve a small stone or ring from the bottom. Just like with the hot iron, the scalded arm would then be bandaged and left for 3 days. The verdict, again, rested entirely on the wound's appearance. A clean, healing burn meant divine acquittal, while an infected, unhealing wound meant condemnation. The logic was simple. A righteous God would protect the innocent from mortal harm, or ensure their wounds healed miraculously. Perhaps the most infamous, particularly for accusations of witchcraft, was the ordeal by cold water. This test was based on a different theological premise. The accused would be bound, often with their right thumb tied to their left big toe and their left thumb to their right big toe, a position designed to prevent swimming. They would then be lowered, sometimes by ropes, into a consecrated body of water, a pond, a river, or a specially blessed pool. The belief was that pure water, being sanctified, would accept an innocent person, allowing them to sink, while it would reject a guilty one, causing them to float. The chill of the water, the struggle against the bonds, the desperate gasps for air. It was a brutal spectacle. If the person sank, they were considered innocent and quickly pulled out, though often half drowned. If they floated even slightly, it was seen as proof of guilt, a sign that the pure water rejected the impurity within them, often interpreted as having forsaken baptism, a common accusation against alleged witches. The rationale behind these ordeals, however bizarre they seem today, was deeply rooted in the medieval worldview. People lacked any other means to investigate crimes. There were no fingerprints, no ballistics, no systematic interrogations. The word of one person against another was often all that existed, and without objective proof, only a higher power could arbitrate. The fear of God was immense, and it was believed that no one could deceive the divine eye. Priests who often administered these tests lent them undeniable spiritual authority, making the outcome seem truly sacred and beyond human dispute. For centuries, these trials served as the ultimate arbiter, a terrifying last resort when all other avenues of justice were exhausted. The guilty, if they survived, faced severe punishment, while the innocent, though often physically scarred, were reintegrated, their name cleared by divine decree. These practices reflected a desperate ingenuity in the face of overwhelming complexity and limited understanding. They were, in essence, another form of medieval life hack, a brutal shortcut to truth in a world that had no other means to find it. Life in the medieval world, even for those who survived the stern judgment of an ordeal, was a constant journey of risk, and nowhere was this more evident than on the roads themselves. Travel was an undertaking fraught with peril, a far cry from the ease of modern conveyance. Imagine stepping out from the relative safety of a walled town onto a path that was often little more than a mud-churned track, winding through dense forests where shadows lengthened with every passing hour. These were not the engineered thoroughfares of empires long past, nor the paved routes of tomorrow. Many were ancient Roman pathways, crumbling and overgrown, or simple routes carved by centuries of foot traffic and wagon wheels. Bridges were rare, often replaced by treacherous fords or unreliable ferries, where a sudden flood could mean disaster, sweeping away not just goods, but lives. The chill wind often cut through thin cloaks, and the constant dampness seeped into bones, making every mile an endurance test. The dangers were manifold. Bandits, often desperate men driven by hunger or greed, lurked in secluded areas, especially within the deep, dark woods that covered so much of the landscape, preying on merchants, pilgrims, and any lone traveler. Wild animals, particularly wolves and bears, were a genuine threat, especially as dusk settled and the light began to fade. Disease, too, traveled relentlessly with people, spreading along trade routes and through crowded, unsanitary inns. A simple fever caught on the road could quickly turn fatal in an age without effective medicine, far from any healer or familiar hearth. But perhaps the greatest challenge was the sheer lack of reliable guidance. Medieval maps, when they existed at all, were vastly different from the precise geographical tools we possess now. They were often more artistic or theological statements than accurate navigational aids, depicting mythical beasts at the edges of the known world, sacred sites like Jerusalem at their perceived center, or the known world as a flat disk. Precise distances were rarely noted, and true geographical features were often distorted or entirely absent. You could not simply look up a route, nor could you rely on standardized mile markers, for the very concept of a mile could vary significantly from one region to another. So, how did people navigate these vast, often unmarked stretches of land? They relied on a combination of ancient wisdom, local knowledge, and sheer intuition, often coupled with a deep, unspoken prayer for divine protection. Coastal travelers would follow the coastline, recognizing prominent headlands, bays, and the shifting patterns of the tides. Inland, the course of rivers often provided a natural guide, as did ancient tracks worn deep by generations of use. During the day, they might follow the sun's arc across the sky, and at night, if the sky was clear, the stars offered a compass. The North Star, Polaris, was a constant beacon for those who understood its steady presence in the night sky. However, such celestial navigation required clear weather, a luxury not always afforded to the medieval traveler, who might find themselves enveloped in days of fog or torrential rain. For more immediate direction, people depended heavily on local lore. They would stop in hamlets and villages, asking peasants and innkeepers for directions, inquiring about the best ford across a river, or seeking advice on which path to avoid due to recent bandit activity or impassable terrain. Inns and monasteries often served as crucial waypoints, providing not just shelter and often meager food, but also crucial, if sometimes conflicting, information about the road ahead. Sometimes a traveler might hire a guide, a local who knew the twists and turns of the land, though even a guide offered no guarantee against unforeseen dangers. Astrology was sometimes consulted, not for direct navigation, but to determine auspicious times for setting out on a journey, hoping for divine favor to mitigate the inherent risks. For longer journeys, travelers would often band together, forming small caravans for mutual protection against the ubiquitous threats, finding some small comfort in shared vulnerability. Whether on foot, atop a horse, or jostling along in a creaking wooden cart, every journey was a test of endurance. Despite these immense difficulties and the slow, arduous pace that could see a journey of a few hundred miles take weeks or even months, people traveled. Pilgrims embarked on arduous journeys to sacred shrines, seeking spiritual solace or penance, believing the physical hardship purified their souls. Merchants braved the roads and seas to exchange goods, forming the very arteries of the medieval economy, bringing silks from the east and salt from distant mines. Soldiers marched to war, their heavy armor adding to the burden of long distances and uncertain provisions. Diplomats and messengers carried vital communications between distant lords and kingdoms, their lives often hanging on the speed and secrecy of their passage. Each journey was an act of profound faith, a leap into the unknown, where every bend in the road held the potential for either discovery or disaster. The very act of movement was a testament to human resilience, a quiet defiance against the vast, untamed world. You learned to read the land, to trust your instincts, and to accept that much of your fate lay beyond your control, often in the hands of providence or sheer, unpredictable luck. This constant state of vigilance, this reliance on subtle cues and whispered warnings, shaped a profound connection to the immediate environment, a connection largely lost in our age of instant information and paved highways, where the unknown is rarely more than a screen away. This reliance on intuition and inherited knowledge was not confined to the open road. It permeated every aspect of medieval existence. The era in which these ingenious yet often perilous life hacks thrived was defined by a profound, almost unyielding adherence to tradition and a limited scientific understanding. For centuries, the world was perceived through a lens inherited from ancient thinkers and religious doctrines, rather than through systematic observation and rigorous inquiry. Consider the medieval approach to health, the widespread belief in the miasma theory, that illnesses were caused by bad air or noxious fumes, led directly to practices like infrequent bathing and the overwhelming use of strong perfumes. It wasn't merely a preference for scent. It was a desperate, misguided attempt to create a barrier against an invisible enemy believed to enter the body through the very air. People genuinely believed clean water opened pores, making one more susceptible to these unseen threats. This ancient idea, passed down and misinterpreted, persisted for generations, profoundly shaping daily hygiene. Similarly, medieval medicine rested upon the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness was attributed to an imbalance. This led to the pervasive and often dangerous practice of bloodletting, where physicians or barbers intentionally drained blood from a patient, hoping to restore equilibrium. Trepanning, drilling holes into the skull, was another extreme measure, performed to release evil spirits or relieve pressure, based on this same limited understanding of the human body. These were desperate attempts to heal, rooted deeply in centuries-old texts and accepted wisdom. Even eating was a constant negotiation with decay. Without modern refrigeration, food spoiled rapidly. Meat, fish, and vegetables often turned rancid. To combat this, people relied heavily on salting, smoking, and pickling, but these methods were not always sufficient. The liberal use of strong spices, imported at great cost from distant lands, served a dual purpose: to add flavor and, more importantly, to mask the taste and smell of food past its prime. Pungent cloves or cinnamon could effectively disguise unpleasant notes, making it palatable, if not entirely safe or pleasant. This was not a culinary choice, but a pragmatic necessity for survival. The pervasive presence of vermin and insects reflected this limited understanding of sanitation. Fleas, lice, and rats were unwelcome, yet unavoidable companions. Methods to combat them were rudimentary: crude traps, attempts to smoke them out, or simply enduring their presence. Germ theory was centuries away. Thus, constant itching and the risk of plague carried by fleas on rats was simply accepted as an unavoidable part of everyday life. The pursuit of beauty often led to self-poisoning. Fashionable appearances such as the pale skin achieved with white lid or the sparkling eyes created with belladonna, were sought through means that were, in reality, slow-acting poisons. These practices highlight a world where tradition and aesthetics often took precedence over safety simply because the long-term dangers were unknown. Each of these solutions, from the medical to the cosmetic, was a product of its time, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of profound ignorance, and a stark reminder of how far our understanding has come.